So tell me a little bit about what you think are the most significant hurdles in developing nanotechnology for commercial applications.
I'm not sure that the hurdles for developing nanotechnology for commercial applications are too different from those hurdles that are present in any kind of technology. I would say that some barriers a technologist has or have kind of almost implicit in their character is that they think that the technological solution to a problem is always going to be the one that wins out when there's a graveyard of promising technologies that didn't have a market need. Maybe the timing was bad. They didn't know what product they were trying to or what problem they were building a product to try to address. And you had hammers and no nails kind of things. So there have been many instances where we've developed something that I thought would be a useful technology, but rather but the use case just wasn't there, or there were people who were doing it already. There is a quote from a famous chemist at Caltech, Nate Lewis, who is talking about alternative energy sources and competing with conventional sources of carbon-based fuels. And he said, why do we need to develop a technology to go to the moon when Southwest Airlines is already there and handing out peanuts?
I like it. Um, and that kind of brings up, in my mind, a question about entrepreneurial culture and maybe actually it seems like you have a little bit more of an entrepreneurial and business awareness. Can you talk a little bit more about any sort of education you've had to give you some training in that area?
When I started my scientific training, I viewed business training as, if I'm allowed to say, douchebaggy. I thought that the idea of that it's not what you know or what your ideas are, it's how you present them. I thought that that was wrong in some deep and fundamental way. I thought that the technology would be able to speak for itself, and that wasn't ever going to be a question of saying the right words to the right people in the right order to get your work financed, to bring on a CEO, to hire employees, to even to work with potential licensees of a technology. And so I think that people who have pure technical training, like me, often think that the business training is kind of useless. And we often resented as grad students. I was in the chemistry department at a university with a very strong business school. And we would show up at bars or some event where there would also be business students, and they were better dressed than us. They were more polished speakers than us. And we had the impression that they were exploiting the value created by technical people, and that they were the ones making all the money, whereas the technical people were the ones toiling in the back room to develop the next widget, which was going to make them rich. And so I had there was a lot of inertia in the way I was thinking until sometime during the last few days of my PhD, the last few months of my PhD, when I started reading books about startup culture and business creation. I was really influenced by the writing of, someone whose other opinions I don't necessarily agree with, but Tom Friedman wrote this book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, about the intersection between green energy technologies and the global economy, and some other things that he and others had written about the fact that most new job creation in America was a result of new companies and new companies being acquired by bigger companies. There was also something that I heard at the time, for a quote from, I forgot his name, the founder of Stonyfield Farms Yogurt, who said that if you're going to change the world, don't view it as you are David versus Goliath. Your goal is to become Goliath and maintain your sense of social responsibility and social justice while you are developing your business. So when I went to Stanford, there was a program that was intended for technology-minded students and faculty called the Program in Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which has since been renamed Stanford Ignite. And that was an intensive semester-long nights and weekends program that was basically a boot camp. It was almost 20% of an MBA content-wise. We read through 2 binders, like 1,000 pages of case studies and textbook chapters, and learned the basics of 16, 1 week each of core competencies in business. And what I found is that it was useful not only in having startup companies spin out of my lab, or which students started later on in life, but were spurred to do so, I hope, by things that they learned as members of my laboratory. But it has also helped me as an academic administrator. So I was Associate Dean for Students for 2 years. I was Director of our Student Success Center before that. I was our Graduate Affairs Coordinator before that. And we're always coming up with new value propositions for donors, for students who are ultimately our customers, let's face it. And as department chair at University of Rochester in chemical engineering, there are a number of revenue sources that I need to be able to help bring into, help activate, that have been maybe not as high performance as they could be in the context of the university. And so everything I've learned about product market fit, about finance, about accounting, has been very useful in all of the activities that I've since taken on. So I no longer think of business training as selling out, even for technical people.
The dark side.
That's right.
So do you have an entrepreneurial culture in your laboratory? How do you emphasize that? How do you, get the younger students and postdocs in your lab excited about thinking entrepreneurially?
I think that scientific research, when done right, is inherently entrepreneurial. There are a few different models of scientific research in a university environment. So we're all in this milieu, we're competing for funding with program managers, with our peers that are on these review panels. We also are competing for attention of the media. We're competing for spots in high-profile journals, and even journals that just have some decent distribution network and good relationships with Google search, so that results come up. We're competing for eyes. And there are a couple of ways of doing it. One is to be really, really good at a topic that everyone agrees is important, and to do that really, really well. And we need those types of labs. They're not necessarily identifying an absolutely new area of research, but they are really damn good at what they do. But there's a lot of risk to that approach, because you have to stay up with the literature very closely. You have to actually be the best or among the best, producing the most innovative work to solve a problem that everyone knows is there. The other approach, and the approach that I think I have taken, or that I have tried to instill in my students, is to look for the blue oceans between the atolls of knowledge in the Gulf or in the ocean. and to try to find areas of your competency that no one else is going to have by virtue of the fact that you're combining expertise or even just interest, even if it's not expertise. So
So
my
your
first
strategic strengths, basically.
strategic strengths. Think about it in terms of intersection. So my first topic, I intentionally wanted to make fundamental. I didn't want to do something that was entrepreneurial because I needed to establish my chops as a researcher. So my research topic was, what are the molecular and structural bases for that that lead to certain mechanical characteristics in semiconducting organic materials? And it's a very basic science project. And the reason I chose it is because if I look at all researchers in every field who know something about organic chemistry, maybe I'm 1 in 10, somebody who knows something about that. Then you take some people who know something about mechanics. I'm not great there, so maybe I'm only 1 in 2, but I'm interested in it. Then take people who are interested in solar energy. Maybe I'm 1 in 10 there as well. So while I'm not going to win many grant proposals in any of those individual areas, if I multiply those numbers together and I get big denominators, I'm 1 in 10 times 1 in 2, so I'm 1 in 20 times 1 in 10 again. So now I'm 1 in 200. I'm now at the 99.5th percentile of somebody who knows something at the intersection of organic chemistry, mechanics, and solar energy. So we were able to get grant funding. We were able to get our papers through without too many revisions. And the literature was quite sparse in that area. And I think that if I have to say if I have to define any production function on my own part that has led students to go out and start companies afterward, it has been the training that I've tried to instill on looking for areas of your not just competence, but interest in finding what you can do at the intersection that other people aren't doing, and you'll create new knowledge and new value in the process.
And then I bet that can be pretty intimidating because it seems high risk in the sense that you're not following the crowd, but you're basically discovering a whole new world for exploring. But you're the one to do it. So, it's high risk, high reward in that regard.
My PhD advisor, George Whitesides at Harvard, was quite well known for being a faculty entrepreneur. And I think I, I, I'm tempted to say that I got this approach from him, but I think I was drawn to his lab because fundamentally I shared that mindset. And so he used to say that it's actually less risky to do something in the middle of the ocean between
Yeah.
islands because you're not competing as intensively with other people. And if you're in maybe you're not able to get as strong a team together, or maybe you're just, I don't know, less intensely focused on it than the top people in that particular very established field, then you're going to have a bad time getting papers and grants and patents out the door.
Makes sense. It's a very interesting way to think about it, and a different philosophy than maybe some people approach as they're starting out their academic careers. So let's move on to a new subject or a related subject, but I'm interested in your technology spinouts. So you've been involved in a couple of these over your career, probably starting when you were in grad school. Tell me a little bit more about those technologies and maybe your approach to identifying and developing those spinout opportunities.
It started let me say that I'm not going to give up my professor job. And so there's a bit of an incubator-ish quality to my lab, but I wouldn't say that I'm a faculty entrepreneur in the way that many many of my colleagues are. But at the same time, I've been connected to multiple startup companies that were started either as technologies in the lab, or by students who started to work in those areas while they were students or developed competencies in my lab and then later started companies. So I'll give you briefly describe those. As a postdoc, I was involved in some creation of IP around mechanical biosensors, particularly ultra sensitive pressure and vibration sensors based on capacitive capacitive coupling between electrodes between slabs of elastomers that are structured in a certain way to allow quick rebound and a very high resolution of sensitivity. That has been, spun out. I have stock options and in the company, and also I'm an inventor on the patent, and maybe someday there will be some royalties there. I'm not really involved too much in that company. When I became but it's something that I monitor, and intellectually I contributed to the founding of it. As a PI, and that was as a postdoc, as a PI at UC San Diego, one of my students, Alex Zaretsky, became very interested in low-cost production of graphene, and this was about 10 years ago. He started a company, Groltex, which at the time they set up shop in an industrial park in San Diego, and at the time you could purchase graphene from them from their online marketplace, and they also sold to major commercial suppliers. So at the time they were quite an important domestic supplier of graphene to the R&D market. They've since pivoted to more, let's say, value-added products and joint development agreements with companies, and they've closed down the direct to consumer graphene business to the extent that there's a direct to consumer market there. And so they've kind of gone into stealth mode, but the company is, very much alive and working. Another company that I'm involved in as a scientific advisor is a financial service company that focuses on individuals who have capacity to donate to scientific causes, to donate to them to scientific causes at research institutions with a very low rate of overhead. So if you give to a research foundation, typically there's a lot of money spent on overhead and mailings and so on. But this is a company called Benefunder, provides a financial product to wealthy individuals and foundations that funds individual research labs and research centers based on the mandate of the donor or the foundation. And they also have the opportunity to make impact investments in any tech-related IP and startups that come out just by virtue of the fact that they're already connected to the inventors via the donations that they made to the basic science. Another company is an art company called Hyperspace Lighting, which was founded by two students at UC San Diego, one of whom was my PhD student who learned some programming and device engineering, and he and his co-founder, who is a physics PhD student, they founded this company that is almost like a laser light show, but with LEDs and mirrors, and they've made some super compelling and cool looking types of wall hangings and art pieces that respond to music, and they've been very popular in clubs and with the kind of electronic dance music and bar scene, and the kind of Burning Man scene, and they're generating, seven figures of revenue per year on a good growth trajectory, and that's their full-time job now. And I'm, very proud to see that that although it's not related necessarily to nanotechnology, I think that hopefully some of the design and engineering mindset that arose is partially due to the training in my lab. Another student, and that's Tim O'Connor was the name is the name of the student who graduated. A BSMS student later on, Mohammed Al Qadra, did his PhD after he did his BSMS, and got best paper of the year in chemistry of materials in 2018. Did his PhD in water purification in chemical engineering at MIT, and then started a company which is on a really aggressive funding trajectory on lithium ion and lithium metal recovery from poor quality brine sources. And I'm in we are an angel investor in that company. So yeah, we've been connected. I've been connected to a number of startup companies and commercial enterprises that are directly or indirectly related to the activities of my research laboratory.
I know you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but based on these personal experiences, what are you seeing as the biggest challenges in bringing those technologies from, the lab setting into the market?
I think the business plan development it's an experiment, right? You have to have a hypothesis about where the product is going to be useful. We'll take the example of Groltex. So at first, just selling graphene in kind of the marketplace section of the website, almost like Amazon. You just put your credit card number in, you say how many square inches of graphene you want, and like Joanne Fabrics, it's there. And that was a good revenue stream at the beginning. They didn't take a ton of investments because they had operational income coming in from that business. And, that was good, but was that, selling a commodity type material, was that going to be, what made them rich? What was going to provide a lucrative scalable business? Probably not. They would need to pivot and find customers, acquire customers while the company was already up and running into a higher value space where they could add value to the graphene that they're selling through these joint development agreements. In the case of hyperspace, there were a lot of struggles at the beginning on finding a supplier, a manufacturer, and they're now on their third manufacturer that could meet the tight millimeter, sub-millimeter based specs that you had to get for these three-dimensional effects to even happen in this fairly analog device of mirrors and colored LEDs. And so that was a huge challenge. And also the customer acquisition is a challenge there as well. Do you go after the high value, the high volume buyer, or do you go after the individual consumer? And each route has, poses different challenges to your pricing and your marketing strategy. And at first, there's no right answer, but you have to pick something. Otherwise, you're never going to get there. So you have to use your best judgment. And that's a scientific experiment. Even, Benefunder, this is the financial product. The founders of Benefunder, I was one of the first 5 PIs on the platform, and I was funded early on by the platform, and I've had an advisory role since then. At first, it was a not-for-profit company, and the founders didn't quite realize that if you're a not-for-profit, there's a difference in whether versus for-profit. you either own or don't own the assets that you then distribute, and that has implications in how your company is taxed and what kind of flexibility you have and who you can donate to and who you can take money from. But these are things that you have to just commit to and do before you even realize that you didn't know what the implication was going to be. But you just have to pick something and go with it because you're never going to be able to make the absolute right decision at first.
Yeah, and I think as an experimentalist, as a trained as a scientist, you have to also, let go of your ego sometimes and look at the data and make a decision. And if you have to pivot, you have to make that decision pretty quickly in
You
order
also have
to.
to you also sorry, you also have to be afraid not to not to be afraid of appearing like you're ignorant. So even when we started in the field of mechanical properties of organic semiconductors, what we thought was, this niche field. And like I said, I was only one of two scientists that knew anything about mechanics. And so we said some things in some of those early papers that are downright cringeworthy, like, misuses of the word elasticity and not taking into account concepts like entanglement in grant proposals. And I look at them now and I'm like, ugh. But it's not that we said anything that was particularly wrong. It was just we didn't know, and now we do. But you have to
Yeah.
take one step forward, and you're not going to be able to come up with a perfect approach right out of the gate.
So with that, what advice do you have to researchers who are interested in commercializing their university research?
I think it's important to talk to a lot of people and go to conferences and watch YouTube videos in areas that you don't know anything about, but that you want to know something about and which your technology could possibly touch. So, some of the most important conferences that I ever went to, I was not a presenter at. So I went to a World Haptics conference that had representatives from academia and industry. That was in Munich, Germany in 2017. And it was super important just to hear what the state of the art was. And you don't get that from reading papers, which are super focused. And you often don't get it from reading news articles because it's not fresh enough. And it's also often news articles are based on what happened to be picked up by a certain university news department in a particular semester, right? And there might be stuff that people on the ground are doing that you just need to see and feel firsthand in a high throughput manner. I feel as, and I went there without presenting anything. I went to Semicon West when I was interested in flexible electronics, and actually going to that conference, which had a big symposium on the future of flexible and wearable tech, that turned me away from continuing in that field. It was a combination of going on that um, going to that conference and seeing areas where I thought we could compete as a lab on a shoestring budget to an attitude where I absolutely thought we could not compete and we could add value somewhere else. And that turned out to be a pivot to haptics where there was less activity, especially in the wearable space beyond just vibration that you get from an Apple Watch and so on. So that's a I think that's a useful approach. You need to know the landscape in which you intend to enter.
That's a great suggestion. What can universities do better to support researchers who are entrepreneurially minded and are thinking about commercializing technologies?
I think that training for technologically minded people, scientifically minded people, is not quite is not quite up to the task in raising the next generation of technology entrepreneurs. And I mean technology broadly interpreted, where you have new physical effects, new biological findings, not just consumer internet companies, app developers, and so on. I mean, it would be amazing if natural sciences departments could borrow cues from engineering departments. So, can chemistry have a stronger connection to industry that we have in chemical engineering? Can there be something about, could there be mandatory courses in finance and product development and just how the world actually functions? Why did I have to be a postdoc taking a voluntary class at the business school before I had even heard of a net present value calculation? Given that I'm going to take chemistry and biology and even physics and R&D departments at major corporations, everything that they do is going to be subject to that lens. And why shouldn't they be aware of it? Why give away all that stuff to the business people? Why not integrate all the different units up and down the intellectual supply chain within an organization a with a lens through which their products are going to be treated by their superiors?
Well, we hope that listeners to this podcast and going forward, they'll have an opportunity to learn some of these key terms and just get familiar with the world outside of the sort of traditional the lab environment. Well, thank you so much, Professor Lapomi. We are super grateful for your time today and for your thoughtful answers, perspectives, stories that you've shared with our audience. For our listeners who are interested in learning more about Professor Lapomi, he does have a YouTube channel and podcasts of his own, and a Twitter X, I guess is the new term. So we will add those links into our show notes. Thank you again. And we hope to
Pleasure to
talk to
be
you
here.
again soon.
Likewise, thanks.